Taking a live look from the Fox 5 rover, it's cruising down a road that's been left in the dark. You could see right there some streetlights along Boulder Highway are still out tonight. One man living in the area told us they've been out for months. Fox 5's Mike Allen caught up with him today and joins us live now to tell us what he found out to try to get some answers from Clark County.
Yeah, so first I'm going to give you an idea of how dark it is here. Over the last several minutes that I've been standing in this spot, which is on Boulder Highway, just north of Flamingo, I've seen several people try to cross the street, but really the word see is doing a lot of heavy lifting there because I could barely see them, and drivers, I'm sure, are having a difficult time seeing them as well. I'll step out so you can see because I am lit up by the camera light, but here you see several street lights out right now. The county says crews are taking action on this soon, though.
Folks living, working, and commuting on one of the busier roads in the valley say they've been left in the dark when the sun goes down.
The entire southbound side of Boulder Highway between Indios and Flamingo, they've been out since January. Then February rolls around, and then the northbound side, the first 7 out of the 8 street lights were out.
A man who lives in the area who wishes to remain anonymous reached out to Fox 5 after he says he tried several times to reach Clark County about the issue, citing safety as his main concern.
Black as the dark side of the moon out here sometimes. It's just gets kind of perilous, just driving around, much less for the pedestrians. And there's a lot of pedestrians in this area with the apartments and whatnot.
He says that after reaching out in March and April, he grew a little frustrated that no one with the county was taking action, so he reached out to Fox 5, which then asked the county about the issue. We heard back with the county representative saying, in part, the outage is due to failed electrical connections and an NV energy meter installed in a light pole in the area. We are working on replacing the box and related circuits. We hope to have the installation complete next week. The man who first called about the outage is happy to see something being done, but admits he's frustrated with the county.
A little disappointed, yeah, because every time I've called them a bunch of times before, living in my neighborhood near Trop and Boulder, and they were out within a few days every time.
Now, as we reported last month, the city of Henderson is planning to make upgrades to Boulder Highway just a few miles south of here. That includes adding more streetlights. Reporting live tonight from Boulder Highway, just north of Flamingo, Mike Allen, Fox 5 News, local Las Vegas.
And those upgrades from the city of Henderson are part of a larger effort to revitalize Boulder Highway. The city says their timeline begins in 2024, and it all should be finished by 2026.